All right. So, welcome everybody.
Thank you.
And Kendon, would you like to start with some slides? Shall we do a little bit more of a formal Nova Sutras introduction and then let you get into it?
If you can do that for me, I certainly
That
am
is
happy about it, comfortable.
one of the things I'm here for. So today's topic is going to be introducing focusing practice. Again, I think everybody currently on is at least somewhat familiar with the Nova Sutras and our concepts of Ubuntu and Agaya, recognizing our deep interdependence as part of our connection with the sacredness of nature. And one of the interesting things that Kendon and I have been exploring actually up until about half an hour ago is a real question about the relationship between focusing practice and Nova Sutra's work in the world and how we make Ubuntu and Agaya more accessible and present for people.
But a bit more specifically, how can focusing help in meeting the needs of the world?
Yeah. So I'm going to bring us back into the group here. Oh, and Linda's coming back in. That's great.
Oh, Linda. Hello again, Linda.
She may not quite be able to hear us yet, but
Computer suggests that she's moving in this direction.
all right. Hopefully, Linda, can you hear us now?
Well, if she said yes, we would not hear her.
Audio
right?
options for her. So, okay, well, I think we're going to need to just get started. I'm not sure what.
Okay.
No, looks like we're going to lose Linda, so I'm not sure what her connection problem is, but sadly it's something at her end that I can't coach her through because
okay, but it's
can't get onto Zoom.
3:15, so
We should probably get rolling. Yeah.
Why don't I begin?
Yeah.
So the topic today, in contrast to, was it only last week, is Introduction to Focusing Practice. And central to that historically is the focusing partnership. So the idea of focusing partnership is something about which I'll be spending a little time. And Weiser Cornell, who is the foremost author on focusing, I would say, even as compared to Eugene Gendlin, who made the discovery and published the canonical text, but did not. He wrote several other books, but Cornell has been much more prolific in her writing and has brought it much more into the present than Gendlin did. And then focusing partnership partly relates to who you are and who your partner is. And I speak to you as a novice. I've had a total of 10 focusing practices in my lifetime, none of which, so far as I can recall, have been longer than 10 minutes. Gendlin's book sort of talks about 30 minutes for the focuser with the partner, and then 30 minutes for the partner becoming the focuser. and the focuser becoming the partner. And then that I have sort of taken a giant leap in all of that perhaps deserves a little personal history. So I was a child psychiatrist, which both gave me a developmental perspective and helped me to communicate with people who were early in their capacity for communication, gave me experience with it. And then I trained to be an analyst, and then because of limitations in my personal success with 24 years of experience of personal psychoanalysis, I went on to body-centered therapies, and then from that to meditation, and then from that, in recent months, through the information originally shared by Linda Clark with some of us back in November. Gee, it'll be a year in a week or two. Wow. Okay. But having spent years and years and years as a psychotherapist, I sort of come with givens that are embodied and givens that have some conceptual basis about listening. And so I am sort of ready to participate in focusing partnerships without feeling like I've thoroughly internalized what Kendon has to say in a packed chapter in his original book, Focusing 1978, and what Cornell has to say in, I managed to put that book down. I'm sorry, I'm going to find it. Hold on one moment. Among Cornell's books is a book called The Radical Acceptance of Everything.
Mm-hmm.
Subtitled Living a Focused Life. And this is a compilation of, I will say, 30 or so papers, most written before the book came to publication, a few since. And she has 2 rather brief chapters on focusing partnership, the second of which is provocatively entitled The Perils of Focusing Partnership. So if I were your partner, my job is to listen and to hear and to speak in Kendon's teaching, to repeat back to you your words rather regularly. Cornell doesn't approach it in that, I'm going to call it intrusive a fashion, but that's me. But she does give an interesting discussion of how you can mess up a focusing partnership or how it can be messed up by you. And so before I talk more about focusing, I'll mention that if you're going to enter into a focusing partnership, I would recommend you read both Kendon's chapter, which is, I would call it heavy going, and Cornell's 2 chapters, one of which is online if you want to go there. And in all likelihood, Kendon's book is online at the Focusing website, which is focusing.org. And Michelle either has or probably will present that through chat. I find the Focusing Institute distinctly challenging. It's a massive website with lots of people offering to train you to focus, and once you can do that, to hook you up to a focusing partnership. But it's a considerable resource, just not one I've chosen to try to get into. Of our crowd here locally, Jennifer has gotten into it more than, well, Linda's probably gotten into it a good deal too. I don't really know. Maybe Walter has. I don't have a sense of it as a huge resource for him. But it's by way of reminding people that if you want to practice focusing, the man who is talking to you now is a neophyte. And so I'm sort of suggesting that if you enter into a focusing partnership, maybe before the two of you start, or three or a group, but typically two, you read the Kendon chapter and you read the 2 articles with a bit of commentary and the Cornell book, The Radical Acceptance of Everything. And then perhaps after you've been working together for a month or so, you agree to read at least Cornell again and see if it raises any issues you want to explore further, because it's all about respecting the space of the focuser and the focusing partner demonstrating to the extent that seems useful. They're getting it. They're getting what they're hearing. So typically in my focusing partnerships, my partners are saying very little more than uh-huh, and that works just fine, but I'm not saying a whole lot, to which they're saying uh-huh. And if you look at what Kendon is talking about, there's a lot of verbal exchange. So you'll find your way, and those are some guide points. Now, backing off, focusing, writing about it, living with it has been fascinating. Quickie restatement. There's a part of us that knows consciously, that's loosely the neocortex, that's the neural substrate. The neocortex permits us to have conscious thoughts and to generate words and so on. But there's another part of us which corresponds diagrammatically to this diagram labeled mammalian brain. And that part is not your 6-layered neocortex. That part is the limbic system plus a little more. And it's not connected point for point. Neocortex, your retina, has a point-for-point connection with a couple of relay stations, but each retinal neuron stimulates a singular retinal cell in each of those neural maps, and 2 or 3 layers getting to the cortex. The allocortex, which has little subdivisions when it links up, when it lies along the neocortex, but it's pretty much allocortex and neocortex are the 2 kinds of cortex that we operate from. And allocortical connectivity is diffuse, where neocortical connectivity is point for point and specific. And then, very importantly, allocortical processing underlies our early learning, but it operates without conscious thought. And it pretty much has matured by around age 7. And that's the part of the brain that is processing, it's part of the system that's processing emotions. And it's processing it in a way that is very much related to musculature. So Darwin demonstrated or pointed out a century ago, and plus, almost two, that when we bring the sides of our mouth up and our eyebrows up more or less, we are moving into a facial expression that is a smile and is associated with some kind of good feeling or humor. And if you direct actors to put their faces in the shapes of a smile or a frown or whatever, or a glare, they experience the emotion willy-nilly, that in our early development, infant, toddler, emotion and muscle are as though one for at least our face and neck and to some extent shoulders. And so you're developing all kinds of habit patterns of feeling and being without conscious awareness of it. And then we learn to talk and we learn to think, and we sort of lose sight of that, but that allocortical capacity, that mind-body capacity, is reflex, is intuitive, is out of consciousness, but is very much part of everyday life. So if I'm driving along West Cliff and I come to, in my case, Columbia Avenue, I know it's West Cliff, I know it's Columbia Avenue, but I'm not paying attention to that to my driving. By feel, I know it's time to turn right, and I turn right. It's automatic. It's unthinking. And that is hugely important in complex ways. We learn at that level by inclination, by predisposition, and we're learning every second of our lives, and it's being coded out of consciousness, loosely in the allocortical system, which does include some neocortex, but does not lend itself to consciousness. And so I've come quite recently to advocate a language for this subconscious level of processing that is not thinking and is not feeling in the classical, and what we normally think of as feeling, but we know, we could say by the seat of our pants, we know by feel, we know by sense, we sense something, and we do something without thinking about it. And where we see pretty precisely and we hear pretty precisely, and we have feelings that are somewhat precise, not as much so as the other senses, but that's not relevant at the moment. What the language I recommend for subconscious processing is to recognize that it's vaguer, but that we have a feeling, we have a sense. And if we are capable of some degree of meditative practice, we can fairly easily be present to that sense. Now, let me ask Michelle, can we bring up David Rome?
Just the references, or do you want the quote?
Those three paragraphs.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Kendon has written extensively on focusing. Cornell has written extensively on focusing. The book I'm presently recommending is a book by David Rome, and I offer this very simple statement, and I will read it aloud. Take time to really come into your body. Go through the gap steps. In previous exercises, he's had you experience groundedness and awareness and presence. Go through the gap steps to settle into a state of grounded, aware presence. Then shift your attention to your breath. Notice the feeling of air entering and leaving your lungs. Feel the sensation of your chest and abdomen expanding and contracting from your throat all the way down to your lower belly. Then shift attention from the sensations of breathing to the entire inner space where breathing happens. Rest your awareness there gently with an attitude of friendly attending. Notice anything inside that space that is present in a felt sense way. Moving down, if nothing seems to be there at first, you give it some time. When you notice any kind of unclear inner sensation, stay with it for a while. Keep it company. Appreciate its felt qualities, noticing its shape, texture, movement, color, or temperature. Welcome its presence and get to know it. If you find yourself going off into thoughts or fantasies, gently bring your attention back to whatever is present in your body in an unclear but somatically felt way. And I think there's one more paragraph.
No, that was all.
No?
That was all we had on this round anyway.
That's fine. So. I think it's 3 in the book. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
So when I'm doing focusing, I'm going within. I find it, I'll call it, easy enough. And typically I'm not aware of a whole lot in the moment, but then I will typically become conscious of, I'll call it attention. Sometimes it's been attention, Tension. It's been a sense of tension around my trachea. Sometimes a more generalized, disquiet tension within. And then I just sit with that. And I sort of get a feeling or a sense, and Kendon calls this felt sensing, that has more shape or form or something to me. And I tune into that. So recently, let's see, what was I tuning in today? I was tuning into confusion and mystery. I'm doing 2-3-year-old work. That's my stuff. But I was being present to not understanding what was going on as much as I needed to. For example, when I was 2, my grandfather out in Colorado chopped the head off a chicken, and the chicken ran around the yard. And what? What's going on here? And then quite recently, the last couple of weeks, I've become comfortable with, well, certainly more comfortable, but much more comfortable with what I don't know. And in my case, it related to, and, I've done all kinds of work for all kinds of time, so I've experienced in focusing in the last few weeks, gazing into my mother's, as though I were gazing into my mother's eyes. It felt that way. And seeing in her a need for love and a hunger and a frustration, and that being rather overwhelming for me. I didn't know what to do about it, but for whatever reasons, present day, my senses of feeling responsible for helping, and then recently in my personal experience, being present to that potential overwhelmedness, it became clear to me that I didn't have the skill set, Hey, guy, that's not your job. You don't know what's going on. You don't know how to help. Yes, you're seeing something real, but that's the way it goes, and, hopefully life is good enough otherwise, and you move on. And I found the pace of change to be remarkable relative to, say, 24 years of at least twice a week and more often 3 times a week psychoanalysis. But that was in the day, and I went the way I went and got what I got out of it back then. I do think the psychopathology of body-mind and embodied self which is what I see as being coded in the allocortical system as having a simplicity that in its way is appropriate to the early years of development, even though as we grow older, things accrete to these early patterns and habits and hang-ups, but that the degree to which psychopathology reorganizes in a more functional way with focusing is, to me, remarkable, and I'll be asking other people to say whatever they choose to say about their personal experience. But my impression as a student learning from their experience is that they are finding it a change agent that is at least as good as anything they've run across previously. So the purpose of my talk today is to have people think about reaching out to someone who feels somehow simpatico and inviting them to join in focusing partnership. And I'm available to any who do that as a third partner for the early phases until they feel like they've got it, whatever I can contribute. And then you'll read things in what Cornell writes about pretty briefly, pretty easy to read, things like it's natural to have a sense of friendship, attachment, connection, identification with that focusing partner, but friendship is not focusing partnership, and your responsibility to that partnership is to keep those 10 minutes or half hour sort of inviolate and not to reference them at other times without the person who is doing the focusing being in agreement that that is an appropriate choice. It's their space. It's like a confidentiality agreement. It's loosely confidential to the two of you, and you as the partner only bring up your partner's stuff during your time if your partner is comfortable with your doing that, or your version of your partner's stuff. Okay. Any inquiry about anything I've said so far before I invite anyone else who had focusing experience to share their take on it so far? Any inquiry from others? Nancy.
Yes, Kendon, you talk a bit about how the focusing relates to our work in the larger world, and in particular climate change, climate grief, climate consciousness, and so forth. Was that something you were going to talk about now, or do you plan to do that later?
I could do it now, but let me first find out if there's any other questions others want to raise about this fundamentally different way of knowing and this technique of learning from our information coded essentially out of consciousness, but which we can become conscious of. And I'll mention the metaphor I'm offering people, that we all have an inner Helen Keller who knows a huge amount, and who makes most of our choices for us, like who we vote for, but is doing so out of consciousness. And if you can find your the focusing partnership is more or less a model of me listening to you in a non-judgmental fashion and being present and doing my best to be sure that I'm clear about what's being said, while you in turn are in a kind of inner partnership in parallel to this outer partnership, where you're taking your sort of good enough parent capacity to an inner state that makes itself known if you can just listen in a friendly way. So it's as though you can get, I say, huge benefits, early days for me, but still they seem that way, from doing something. And the pair of you, your conscious self and what I'm calling your implicit self or your embodied self, seem to like that partnership is moving forward, that you're getting clearer and clearer consciously about things that are part of what you know implicitly but hadn't recognized previously. Now, Nancy asked a question, and I say I'll try to speak to focusing and how to help the world in a moment. Any other questions? Well, that's impressive.
Well, I would like to make an observation, and one of the and just at this point, and then partly in reference to Nancy's question, and that is that focusing is primarily a psychological activity, and it is designed specifically for resolving psychological issues and challenges. Now, this does not mean that our psychological issues and challenges are disconnected from the public world. They are not, in fact. They are very deeply integrated, and Gregory Bateson showed that richly in the 1980s. But there is a kindred activity which the liberation theologians around the world are developing, and it's called democratic liberation theology. And I am studying that. That's the only reason I know about it. I'm studying that and have been for some time. And I will be happy to make a statement about that when it's appropriate. I just want to make that observation now.
And let me, in parallel, hold up the Rome book. And he means what his title said. Your body knows the answer. And I come to you as a convert. It's true. It's amazing. And then the subtitle is using your felt sense to solve problems. And I'm reading it, and it's not quite in focus.
Effect change and liberate creativity.
Mirror image. I don't quite know why that is. All right. To solve, I'm going to switch it around. Using your felt sense to solve problems, effect change, and liberate creativity. And in his exercises, there are 19 of them. Number 17 is making a haiku. But in his exercises, he first invites you to, or early on invites you to, see what surfaces when you're present to your felt sense, and then later on raise a specific issue with your felt sense. And so I did try this morning to actually, one other thing. So chapters 18 and 19, Rome comes from a meditation tradition and was closely associated with Chögyam Trungpa in the days when he was setting up Naropa University, and then came upon focusing later on and found the fit of the two systems very powerful. And so his last two chapters are, wait for it necessarily, enlarging space, 2 exercises, enlarging space and wandering with wonder. And then 19, contemplation, sensing for the more. And he encourages, if you will, transcendence of self. Now, I'll give you a quickie statement of what I came to when I brought this specific question. How can focusing help the needs of the world and universe? And my version at the moment of my answer was, as I'm present in this way within, I more and more am aware of my interconnectedness with the without, so that my sense of identification with others, with nature, the universe, the cosmos, grows as an integral part of my being present to embodied self with conscious self. I was having a discussion with Michelle, I guess after I was focusing on that question earlier today, and it seems to me that while the crown chakra doesn't have a neural substrate that I can identify, where some of the other chakras perhaps do, still the crown chakra seems pretty real to me as a sort of bookmark for my connection to the universe. I'm part of that, and I sort of am aware of that somehow with the, when I sink deeply enough into embodied self or that inner listening, I more and more can say I am the tree and the tree is me. But that's a function of this subconscious, relatively undifferentiated way of knowing that is what the allocortical system makes available to us. It's a holistic knowing, and the more I practice it, the more I am operating from the feel of things, rather than from, I don't know, specific conscious conclusions. And in a discussion we were having last night with a group of 3 Quakers and me, I think the Quakers, 2 of them anyway, were saying, let the heart lead the mind. And as I get more and more integrated with knowing by feel, I feel that is indeed part of what is happening, that my heart is knowing, and that heart knowing becomes more and more of how I relate to what I consciously know and to the world. Now, going back to Nancy's question, I had sort of planned to try asking the question on screen, and I could do that, but there's the answer, and I guess I will wait until I'm asked to do that if anyone wants me to, but so you may well not need to, and I don't feel a need to do it. So let me move. Any other questions before I ask people either to comment on their personal experiences so far, those of you who've had some, or to ask me to explore something further? Okay, so anyone who is moved to comment
Francesca?
on... Oh, Francesca, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if this is an extension of Nancy's question, but I'm wondering whether there is an implicit trajectory from becoming more and more aware of what you're feeling to action in the world. Does that make sense?
Well, I'll give you an answer. I mean, I think it removes obstacles to action. My responsibility for my mother's happiness and sense of personal fulfillment and so on is like a rut. And if I am free to be me and can be free to let her be her and then do whatever I do or don't do, she's deceased now, of course. Not that that means I may not have further work to do for her and with her, but that's a whole separate discussion. But back to the obstacles. I have the habit of caring more about the needs of others than my own, and am only now, at 85, doing serious writing. I've had ideas for serious writing throughout my life. I've been at this frontier and that frontier, but couldn't get it together. And I do see, I think there's several things that have influenced my finding myself able to write on complex topics at some length with degrees of communicability. I'm working on that with help from others. But going back to your question, Francesca, my present take on it is that it's a natural evolution. That if you do focusing work, you find yourself better positioned to take initiatives and to be creative. I guess I'll spotlight, and you can, take it out on me, Walter, but I'll spotlight Walter for the moment as the person who is online with us, who's had the most experience with focusing and, comfortable to chime in. Walter, could you comment on Francesca's question?
Well, thank you. I was anticipating doing that whether you asked me or not.
I changed my mind.
I like the question. I like the question. And I like the question because it reminded me that I have often found I need to do focusing to remove my own confusions or to remove some kind of anxiety or to clarify some kind of issue within myself before I can take action on certain things. And those things have varied from more public to less public, more private, some family matters, things of that sort. And I have so come to accustom myself with focusing that I do it without even thinking about that's what I'm doing. And I can give you an example now. And last night I received a book that I had ordered in the mail, and I wanted to just glance at the table of contents before I started reading the book, and I found myself doing two things simultaneously. I found myself beginning to read the book just spontaneously, and I found myself feeling a growing internal tension. And before I even knew this was what I was doing, my attention went directly to that internal tension. I found myself breathing deeply and clarifying and opening space and letting that internal tension speak to me. And it was as though this tension said, hello, I'm your creative self, and I've been waiting for you to come here. Go ahead and do that reading, but recognize why you're doing it now while you're about to fall asleep. And that was true. I was about to fall asleep. I wound up reading a chapter in the book, and I was so delighted with it, I decided, okay, I will come back to it later. The point that I'm getting to here is that the more we habituate ourselves to focusing, the quicker and easier it is to do it, the more spontaneously we are able to do it, and the more we're able to reap the benefits of it. It's available to us. It's readily available to us all the time. I don't know if that helps, Francesca.
Walter, I'll ask you a follow-up question. My understanding is that you are either again writing or beginning to write, and that obviously is a creative process and so on and so on. To the extent that you can, do you see focusing having played a part in your taking on that challenge?
Well, yes. The short answer is yes. And without getting too long-winded about it, I found that I was trying to resolve a number of questions all at once, and I had to do multiple focusings to unwind the multiples, to unwind the questions that I was wrapping up together as a package deal, so to speak, and trying to answer all at once. And I had to pull them apart, pull them apart, and pull them apart. And I was very, very fortunate along the way. When these things happen, I say it proves Gaia loves me. I was very fortunate along the way to encounter this this stunningly articulate and thoughtful German-American historian named Eugen Rosenstock-Huessy, who I mentioned this book to Ken before. He wrote a 758-page monumental history of how Christianity influenced, inspired, and drove all of the revolutions, all of the major and minor revolutions in the West over the last 2,000 years, even the Bolshevik Revolution. And I remember when I saw that, I went, wait a minute now. It was almost impossible for me not to go there and read that one first. But I was patient. I read the book patiently, and it became very clear. And I had already, when I studied Marx back in the early 70s, middle 70s, I remember saying, look, this is religiously inspired. And I remember blurting it out to a professor of Marxism. And he said, well, you're right. Marx's dad was a Lutheran minister. And that was kind of gave me a little bit of mental whiplash, because I knew Marx was Jewish by that point, and I figured his dad probably was. His dad really was, but his dad did become a Lutheran minister. But Marx renounced religion. Some of you may remember. Marx called religion the opiate of the masses, something to be gotten rid of. That kind of internal confusion is common in the West. And not just the West, but probably more so in the West than the East, because for a number of reasons, I don't need to go into whys. What I do need to say here, though, is that getting the clarity on our internal being, our overall internal being, particularly mental and psychological and emotional and friendship and familial issues, the more immediate the issues, the more challenging we find them to deal with. I've said I come from a large family, and I've said among my siblings many times, the most difficult challenges in my life are dealing with family challenges. And almost every time, one or more of my siblings bursts out laughing. And they're laughing from recognition. They're not laughing at me, they're laughing with me. I don't know if I'm answering the question any better now or just adding fodder.
Well, unless someone interrupts me, I will take my privileged position, advantage of it in the following way, and ask Michelle, would it be a violation of your space or not were you to say something about possibilities you see in the relation of focusing practice to enhance creativity?
Well, I was hoping to chime in, and more generally in response to Nancy's earlier question about what does this have to do with the climate crisis, and I would broaden that to ecological and other global crises and problems. And I think there are several different directions that point to why this is helpful and pertinent for those functions, for serving what the world needs right now. First, as Kendon and Walter identified, it really is a practice that helps you as a person. So to the extent that this becomes a practice that's available for people who have already identified themselves as wanting to do good in the world, this makes them more effective as change agents. This is a route to getting rid of obstacles, to being more creative, to feeling better integrated in a way that it means you're much less likely to get frustrated and burnt out and stop functioning well as an activist or change maker in whatever venue you're applying yourself. That alone would be enough. But what really inspires me about this, I think, on this deeper level of being in touch with our allocortical ways of knowing, with these sort of emotional responses, helps integrate the cerebral part of us as humans and the animal part of us as humans. And by doing that, helps remind us that we are animals in an ecosystem. And it helps provide this very internalized, visceral connectedness to as a participant in nature. And I was just watching a graduate student talk on how perception of nature as sacred improves our decision making about nature, because we move from a utilitarian nature as resources mindset into we're talking about something sacred. There, you can't put a price on it. There are no conditions under which it's okay to poison the waters, the atmosphere, make the planet uninhabitable. So again, I see that this focusing practice helps provide a way in there, not only for people who are already engaged, but possibly allows for more of an opening for people who aren't yet engaged and already sort of consciously seeing nature as sacred, to start to tap into that and then start to respond accordingly. Because I think people have a gut reaction. It's our aesthetic sense of how ugly a strip mine is compared to a forest. Everybody has that. There's nobody who thinks a strip mine is prettier than a forest. I dare you to go find me somebody who does. So there is something about a practice like this being more prevalent in the world means that more people are in touch with that truth of the sacredness of nature.
Now, before calling on Nancy, I'll say that, of course, Michelle's comments flow from who she was as she began focusing practice and who she is, today. Michelle, could you also share how much focusing experience you had?
So, 2 good partnership sessions, and then 2 sessions following Jen Lynn's directions and trying to do it independently, which were less successful. The partnership sessions have been very brief so far, but yeah, it is very surprising how quick it is to go into it. And again, that may be because I have other sort of meditation modality practice experience.
Yeah. And we don't have Jennifer to call upon, but I would suppose that her comments would be similar, and I don't regard what I call our crowd as typical, even of Santa Cruzians, let alone humanity. But I do anticipate that our crowd will, in effect, Francesca, I'm saying, well, try it on for size and see what you find. But I'm confident, whether I'm right or wrong, that you will find a similar sort of giant up nature to this practice that will, with all your psychotherapeutic background and experience, be enthralling. So, Nancy.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I've loved everything you've been saying. I'm really looking forward to the practice. The other, I think, critical part here is we've been talking about it, freeing us up to act and to act more creatively. But I'm also giving us a much clearer sense of what we are acting in service to, because we can act, as many a revolution has shown, very effectively with a great deal of power and energy, and very destructively if that power is coming out of our shadow side.
Mm.
And this allows whatever work we do in the world, I think, to become of increasing genuine benefit to the world, and reduces the risk of us being more of a problem than a solution when we do act.
And as I guess is obvious enough, I am in a meaningful way being present to my shadow side when I feel as though I'm gazing into my mother's hungry, frustrated eyes, and my heart catches as I say it, but, still work to be done and moving along. And I was saying to someone today, it was probably Michelle, oh no, it was Summer. Summer spoke of forgiveness, and the only person you heard if you don't forgive is yourself, was roughly what I think she said. And I was saying that there's a level of forgiveness that involves acceptance and even love of your, let's say, tormentor. And among the kaleidoscope of ways I might characterize my mother, I do find in my heart that I am more comfortable with my love for her, for having had the experience as though looking into her eyes in the company of my good enough self. The two of us together doing that was, I have more freedom for doing that, and I have fewer shadows. She is more nearly integrated into me as a huge part of who I am than she was before I stood there in, so to speak, the shelter of my good enough self. Leoma.
Well, I've had just a small taste of this. I've been reading Rome's book with Kendon and trying out little bits and pieces. And there was one moment or one little mini session where I was able to connect with a body sensation with what Kendon calls primal anxiety, that early infant anxiety, which knows something is wrong but doesn't know what. And I was able to feel a transformation of that into curiosity, which is another pretty basic infant thing, where this sensation of something being wrong maybe could become what's going on, and maybe perhaps a gateway towards that fundamental ability of ourselves to be delighted and curious with the world. And it's just the beginning of something that I need to work with more, but if I am standing in regards to whatever challenges coming through me, either personal or world one, but if I'm standing in a place of curiosity instead of deep anxiety, what happens is bound to be better. The other thing I wanted to add is hearing a conference together of two native elders, a video of them talking with each other. And these are men who have taken to learn their native, well, they were brought up and connect in connection with their native traditions. They also know how to be effective in the English modern world, the wordy world. But they spoke, and I had a sense as they talked to each other of this place, this wordless place. One spoke of the special elder who, for about 7 years, was his guide and taught him how to be, from age 4 to 13 or something like that, and who taught him how to be human, how to be a man, and spoke maybe 200 words to him during the entire time, but rather open space for him to become himself. And it seems like in the very wordy, intellectual modern world, that the focusing allows us to head to a much needed wholeness from which to connect.
Silence. Francesca.
Considering, you also don't have to answer this if it's deflecting too much, but considering your training, your background, your work with children, I just wonder, because my training and my experiences in therapy and all have, focused me in certain directions to do my own personal work and healing. But I've been struggling since I retired with how much to go back into all the early garbage, all the early stuff, the traumas and everything, or whether just to start from here and live my life in the present and move forward. I can see with the focusing, the inner, the work you're talking about, that would be incredibly helpful in acting in the world. But I wonder how you yourself integrate your own training, like object relations or attachment issues, with the work you're doing, going deep about your mother. Does that make sense?
Well, let me laugh a little to start with, and then I do think object relations is the frame of reference. That object relations is self-other, it's mother, infant, and so on. But my take 30 years ago, whatever, was that object relations was so important because there was a part of us who only experienced things in terms of self-other. Pretty much any emotional state is in the context of self and other. So here we are back talking about body-mind. But before I was talking body-mind, the power, this is more to Francesca than anyone else, when you get it with object relations, psychodynamics just fall into place. They become as though obvious. And until you get it with object relations, you can, be thrashing around all over the place. And then the insight that self-other was all emotions new, as I say, came decades ago. Never wrote about it, but there we are. Had a neuroanatomy position about that as well, would have been well received. But anyway, back to Francesca's question. More than, I mean, I'm letting go of Freud. Yes, repression has validity, not in terms of sexual overstimulation exactly. Infantile sexuality is a complex issue and far beyond anything we need to address today, but that same 2-year-old, 3-year-old who was looking in his mother's eyes, at some level was conscious of the sexual dimension, but it was basically incomprehensible. You know, if it wasn't thrust upon you, and some of the people Freud was working with had it thrust upon them physically, it, you know, wasn't that relevant to, if you look at things in an Ericksonian psychosocial perspective, there are things that are, each age has its particular challenges, although all the other ages are, you know, jogging along at the developmental dimension that they can handle. That's all right, moving along. I'm at a frontier of understanding, Francesca. When I talked about this mother who would then have been, I don't know, all of 32, something like that, and a very attractive woman. It's so simple, even if quite overwhelming. I mean, I think you've all heard by now, but I'll tell you again. So there I was with my glorious 3-month-old daughter, who was just as wonderful as a 3-month-old can be, full of life, responsive. And I handed her to my mother. I'm laughing. I handed her to my mother, and my mother handed her back and said, "I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable with children until they're old enough to talk." Well, so I learned that, 55 years ago or there, plus or minus, and it changed my view of the world. But it's only now that I can be there with that inner, really quite young child, not at a 3-month-old level, because I mean, why do I center on 2? I won't spend time trying to think that out at the moment, but I do think there's real validity in what I was perceiving. But I'm not yet at the point of trying to integrate what I'm learning. I'm so busy learning and then making notes on pieces of paper. I'm littered with them. That, you know, I'm not going back and taking a look at the interpretation of dreams and seeing where I agree and disagree. But I do think that, although it's individual and unique in ways that challenge the way we write case histories, still in all, I think the challenges of each age, I mean, when I'm talking 2, I'm talking, you mentioned attachment theory, I'm talking object constancy. I'm developing several, I won't, again, all right, let me not get too much into didactic child development and so on. But the simplicity of how it's experienced and the simplicity of its relaxing is the word I'll use at the moment. I could call it dissolving, but the tensions, you're present to the issue and the tensions ebb. And then I've done all the work I've done and all the frames of reference I've done it. But still in all, I'm listening to Michelle, I'm listening to Leoma, I'm listening to Jennifer. There's a comparable. So I'm not bothering my pretty little head, if I may draw upon the Nancy Leoma exchange of yesterday, with Freud much at all at the moment, except to say, well, maybe tomorrow. But more importantly, anyway, as you get into it, Francesca, perhaps you would develop an interest in co-authoring a book on psychopathology of body-mind. Because I'm doubtful that I have world enough and time to get into it, even though I find it a fascinating topic. So, how do you like them apples? And
Well,
I will.
we could go further with this, but it is a digression. I know from what you want to talk about. It just seems like, yeah, another time we'll have this conversation more.
Okay.
But object constancy seems like it would have everything to do with your experience of your mother, but another
or
time.
lack thereof. But again, the vicissitudes. Well, let me, so to move to the purpose of this, and let me be a little, this is a choice that could be seen as doubtful, but let me ask you, Francesca, to share where you are as an individual in your thoughts about seeking a focusing partnership or getting one or another books. And I do recommend David Rome as a starter because it transits into the universe around us and the messages from the universe in a way that Kendon simply does not. But anyway, back to the question, what are your thoughts presently about you and focusing?
I just had this amazing insight that my black cat paces back and forth across my lap when I'm feeling anxiety.
Okay.
So she's absorbing. It's just a wondering. But I did get David Rome's book. I haven't started it. And I'd like to learn more. I mean, I think that this would be good to learn.
What would help you to learn more?
Well, practicing this thing that you can
I agree.
oversee. I don't know how to put it together with, I mean, yeah, I can't help being concerned, and I'm not thinking of Freud. I'm thinking of developmental psychiatrists and psychologists that really understood where the psychopathology happens when there are huge things missing.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like you look at the orphans in the orphanages in Romania, you know,
Yes.
who, you know, and I'm just, maybe I can just ask the question or put it back to you. When you're going deep into this, and maybe I don't know until I've had a chance to practice, but when you're going deep and really paying attention to your inner feelings and knowing that, is it something separate from what you learn about your own development simply as a human child? Does it inform it, or is it something more metaphysical?
I'm going to back up and answer a question I can't clearly recall. I just recall the answer. I wanted to say in response to something someone said that one way Cornell approaches the problem of tuning you into your felt sense, and as I say, if you meditate, I think you'll find it fairly straightforward. But a sort of generic gateway question she asks is, what do you really feel about that? And in doing that, she's inviting your capacity for global, holistic knowing to come front and center, and then you see what answer emerges from that. And then that's at a frontier of your present capacity for understanding. So I very much doubt, I was doing toddler work in my other systems in 2014, 2015, 2016. So when I came to, in 2019, when I came to focusing and started trying it out relatively recently, it began at the frontier where I already was, and I think that's what everyone will find happens. But if you can bring a problem to it, but if you simply ask, how do you really feel about yourself? How do you really feel about life? You'll get an answer. It will be an informative answer, and then you'll see what you come upon tomorrow. You ask the same question. And Yendlin and Cornell, I could say they go on and on. Not a fair statement, but embodied self learns in process, learns in context, and informs us in context and supports a process. Each set of words you find that seem to capture something real within you then becomes a lily pad on which you rest your weight to, I'm talking big lily pads here, on which you rest your weight to take the next step. Everything that you do unfolds into the next, and again, as the person with the most experience with it, I'll ask Walter to comment on that as how that relates to his personal experience.
And Walter, just pardon me for stepping in just for a moment here. So it is almost 4:30. So I just want to.
Well, let me say one other thing in relation to the 4:30ness. It is 4:30.
Continue on if people can stay on. So.
But before we decide whether we want to go on, I want to say I think Michelle and I are inclined to have something or other, tentatively monthly, very much open to, democracy and so on. But at least once a month that Nova Sutras is ready to sponsor a sort of discussion group thing for people who are ideally experimenting with focusing, but beyond that interested. Rochelle?
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
So we'll come up with a regular meeting place at least monthly for people who want to, talk further and learn further. Having said that, Michelle, you're raising the question of whether our time is up.
Just is there anybody who really needs to leave now that it's 4:30? I can close us out and then stay on with those who want to stay on.
Well, I'd like to make a brief comment in relation to Ken and Francesca's dialogue. As I proceed and get more experience focusing, it becomes so much more spontaneous. I've mentioned before, it becomes so spontaneous, I don't even think about it. I'm just doing it. And I have discovered that the woman who wrote the book Trauma and Recovery.
Yeah, I'll think of her name. She's a very nice lady.
She was very, very much spot on with talking about how these things, every one of these things that comes into our mind with any kind of baggage whatsoever, from the least little thing to the greatest things, every one of them is a gift. Every single one of them is a gift. And the more I have allowed that to be true, the more it has proven to be true for me. And it is so much so now that I find myself looking for those intrusive interruptions into my routine. And every single time they are timely. I don't know how they are timely until after I experience them. And I've gotten to where I say almost every time, Gaia loves me. She keeps giving me these gifts.
Thank you. As you were saying that, it occurs to me that if this work, this practice, that maybe it's deeper than our history, our psychological history, and that's kind of the promise and the attraction for both of you. Is that make sense?
It so much makes sense that it makes me want to say to everyone who wants to think about what you are saying that the woman who wrote Symbiotic Earth, oh my goodness.
Lynn Margulis?
Lynn Margulis. Lynn Margulis insists that our genetic code carries our memory all the way back to the first emergence of genes. Now that's a profound suggestion. Call it speculation, call it whatever we want. What a wonderful way to see an opening for possible exploration of self-understanding for this whole species.
Mhm.
Well, it is a chemical coding of experience. In a way.
It also helps us understand that while it's true that experience is the greatest teacher, by comparison, it might be a lightweight one. By comparison, I mean, it may be another way to say it. Our genes carry all of our experiences, the ones that we don't even remember our ancestors having had.
Well, but there is the matter of the detail. I mean, you know, phonograph records and so on. But yes, broadly speaking. Anyway, back to Michelle's question. Anything urgent we need to carry on with? You can find on the Nova Supra's website whatever we do with the ongoing discussion group we're anticipating. I guess any contact information. Maybe Michelle on chat or somehow that my landline is 831-621-2199.
Well, I would offer an encouragement for the monthly gathering, however that unfolds. I would like to participate in that. And I don't see any reason why it could not include updating one another about how our focusing practices are going or whatever else we're doing, or political discussions or whatever we care to venture into as a group.
Well, after we finish the discussion centering on focusing, maybe we also have several other forums that have more specific relation to the other topics. But anyway, and I guess I'll just leave it at the phone line. I mean, anyone's welcome to my email, but at the moment I think we're operating more at a level of talking together than of sending emails.
So I just wanted to point out, stuff that we have coming up are more open-ended, often political discussions are these Monday and Thursday at 11:30. The meditation tomorrow is mostly guided meditation. Connect and Center is going to be kind of a brief check-in, a little bit of guided meditation, a little bit of silent meditation, but also an opportunity to share resources, mostly via chat or just, calling it out and someone will capture it in chat for whatever the heck is going on next week. So, just so that we have at least that little space touching in on the days that we don't have the longer open discussions. And then the following week, in addition to the open discussions, there's a practices based on Joanna Macy's work that Reconnect, specifically looking at grief and anxiety related to climate and ecology issues. And in the middle there, a week from Saturday is our cross quarter, which will be, again, a chunk of guided meditation kind of in the middle with some discussion before and after. So those are what's coming up. And Walter, I'm not sure if you're on our list to get the weekly event listings, but I can put you on that list if you like.
I signed up for it at I think I signed up for it again today.
Okay,
If I, for some reason it didn't happen, I'll let you know, Michelle.
okay, okay.
Thank
Um,
you.
I was, if we're ending, I'd love to just talk with you a little bit, Kendon, about a couple things that have come up during this.